photograph we're looking at now is, I think, an extraordinary photograph. Extraordinary for several reasons. Okay, so it's the only photograph in existence which shows the Brontë parsonage at the actual time the Brontes were there. There is some debate as to when the photograph was taken. Some say Charlotte Brontë was living there at the time, some say it was taken long after she died. It's a strange photograph, isn't it? It all looks very, very staged to me. So it's taken from the graveyard. We're looking at the parsonage in the background. Notice there's no huge trees that we see now. There's a guy on the left-hand side, this guy. He looks like he's posing to me. He's well dressed and he's posing. You've got the guy in the foreground that looks like he's been planted there. Over here, we've got, we can suppose, a father and his daughter out for a stroll. They could be visiting his wife's grave, her mother's grave, I don't know. But they're very well dressed. And in the very background, we have a lady walking around looking very smart. It's tempting to think that that might be a Brontë sister, but no. If she was walking on the path by the side of the parsonage, she would have had to have been 9 foot tall to be there. So we can rule out that being a Brontë sister. So it looks very staged to me. By the way, the person who took that photograph must have been sat at this spot. They must have been sat on this gravestone to get that angle. We can look at today's scene. This is today's scene, very, very different, but you can see the Brontë parsonage in the background. Most of the gravestones are still there. Some have sunk a little bit into the ground. There is a clue with these gravestones, though. It will enable us to date this picture. But why do we care? What's the reason that this photograph holds so much fascination? Well, it's the only photograph, certainly the only photograph I've ever seen. A, the Brontë parsonage. B, taken at the time of the Brontes. And C, with local people in the picture that we can date. So this is a very, very rare photograph indeed. So who are the Brontes? What's Haworth? And why do we care?
Hey yo, there's something in the air. Can you feel it?
Haworth is a fascinating place. You're stepping back in time to the early Victorian era. The place is virtually unchanged from the times of the Brontes. But who were they? Well, it's 5 people. The father and his 4 children. Branwell was the only male. He drank in the Black Bull at the top of the street. He was a gifted writer and painter, but he was also an alcoholic. He got his opium from the apothecary store, and then he staggered back home. His sisters were Charlotte, Emily and Anne. They wrote some of the finest works of English literature from the parsonage. Charlotte wrote Jane Eyre, Emily wrote Wuthering Heights, and Anne wrote Agnes Grey. The Haworth we see now is virtually unchanged from their day. It's now a thriving tourist hotspot. Back in the day, though, it was disease-ridden, and it was quite an unpleasant place to live. Life expectancy was 22. None of the Brontë children made it to the age of 40. Their father outlived them all, and he died in 1861. You can imagine Branwell staggering up here from the Black Bull, and Charlotte, Emily and Anne sweeping down dressed in Victorian splendour. This quadrant, formed from the church, the old school house, the old school rooms, and the parsonage, is Brontë Central. This is where it all happened.
There's a new world growing.
And other than the trees and a few building extensions, it's unchanged.
Even the dark night is kind of bright with starlight. We gravitate like constellations, navigating our life. The full moon's in full bloom. Yo, her light leave you stunned.
Within these walls and against all odds, 3 women changed the face of English literature forever. It's a fascinating story. Their writing is world famous, but the story of their lives, I would argue, is every bit as fascinating as anything they wrote. Any photograph taken whilst they were still alive is going to be of interest. So here's the photograph. Here's the modern day scene. I've tried to get it as spot on as possible. It's not easy, but that is roughly the scene in the photograph, fading in and out of the old scene and the new scene. Here's the old photograph, here's the new scene.
There's a new wind blowing.
How can we date this photograph? Well, there's one little clue. You'll see where the father and the daughter are walking. We can suppose it's a father and daughter. There are 2 gravestones. In the new photograph, there are 3 gravestones. So one of those gravestones wasn't there at the time of the photograph being taken. So let's have a look at the 3rd one that's missing. Okay, so this is the 3rd tombstone on the right of that row of 3. An affectionate remembrance of Sarah. wife of William Binns of Summerfield Villa, Oxenhope. Died September the 9th, aged 31 years. That was actually quite a good age to get to in those days in Haworth. Little footnote there, 6 children of theirs who died in infancy are also buried. So that tombstone was erected in 1853. So we know that that photograph was taken before 1853. Let's have a look at the one next to it. In memory of Mary Ann, daughter of Richard and Sarah Shackleton of Stanbury, who died November the 26th, 1846, aged 5 years. So that tombstone is in the old picture. So we know at the time the photograph was taken, it was after 1846. And we also know from the tombstone that is not there, the headstone that was not there, it was taken before 1853. So we can date this photograph very, very comfortably between 1846 and 1853. Charlotte Brontë died in 1855. So we know that this photograph was taken at the time of the Brontë. So that photograph was taken with real Victorians, real living people. What became of them, I wonder? And we're seeing the Brontë parsonage during the time of the Brontes. For all we know, Patrick Brontë, the father, could be in there in his study right now, and Charlotte Brontë could be writing. She could be in that house as this photograph's been taken.
Which way the wind is blowing.